Welcome to the Next Level Human podcast. As a human, you have a job to do. In fact, you have 4 jobs: to earn and manage money, to attain and maintain health and fitness, to build and sustain personal relationships, to find meaning and make a difference. None of these jobs are taught in school, and that is what this podcast is designed to do: to educate us all on living our most fulfilled lives through the mastery of these 4 jobs. I'm your host, Dr. Jade Teta, and I believe we are here living this life for 3 reasons and 3 reasons only: to learn, to teach, and to love. In this podcast, I will be learning, teaching, and loving right along with you. I'm grateful to have your company. Here's to our next level. Welcome to the show, everyone. Today we're going to be discussing one of these topics that is a let's get us thinking topic. It's all about the next level human philosophy and psychology, and it is a very difficult one, and you'll see why in just a second. It's not just a difficult one for me, it's going to be for you. In fact, it is what I believe the biggest issue that is currently facing our world in general right now. We are now in a world where we have information at our fingertips. Everyone does. And so everyone, in a sense, has become a researcher and someone who can get information at will. And what we've seen is that this has been a blessing and a curse, both a heaven and a hell, a demon and an angel. And the reason why is because what we have learned is information in and of itself does not give us power, so to speak, but it only potentially gives us power and understanding. In a lot of ways, if we don't know how to sort information, make sense of information, and most especially and saliently to this discussion, to determine what is actually truth from fiction and how to maneuver around that, then in fact it is not powerful at all, but it is, I shouldn't say it's not powerful, it's certainly powerful, but it is not something that is going to elevate us, but rather something that will destroy us. And this is the idea of misinformation and disinformation, and also how this collides with freedom of speech. And to me, this is one of the biggest things that we all must deal with as humans, as aspiring next level humans, trying to be our next level human selves. We are going to have to grapple with this. And the fact of the matter is that you and me, none of us can escape this. We will find ourselves believing in sometimes ridiculous, untrue things simply because we don't know how to make sense of things. And so I certainly am not going to start this podcast with the arrogant stance that I know the solution to this problem. I just want this to be a place where we can all come, regardless of what you believe, and just talk about this issue in this podcast. And so this is what this is going to be. Now, of course, I know many of you have very different beliefs than I do. And in fact, I am a person who celebrates that. I think that the quintessential sign of an immature psyche is one that wants the world to behave and look exactly like it. In other words, I feel like a sign of maturity and a quintessential aspect of being a next level human, or trying to come from that mental construct more often than not, is to not only tolerate different points of views, but be inspired by them and interested in them. Think about it. When we think about a next level human, the idea is that we are centered around our own personal growth and evolution, not just for ourselves, but the world. And let's talk about this for a minute in terms of the next level human way of looking at the world. Many people, and I would say far too many people nowadays, come from an extremely individualistic point of view. It's me against the world, nothing else matters. Now, I'm not here to judge that, but I am to say that's not a viable, reasonable, rational way to approach the world because it is destructive. And I'll just give you a simple example of this. If me and my neighborhood, I decide to do whatever I want to do, take whatever I want from my neighbors, not recycle, be destructive in any way, look after my own good but not others. If I tend to do that, and then all my neighbors start to do that, then what will begin to happen is none of us are helping each other out. All of us are wanting everything for ourselves, and it becomes a free-for-all. I believe I deserve. I want to take from you and elevate myself. So I want to elevate myself and push you all down. That is a very base level way of approaching the world. And when we take this extremely individualistic viewpoint, and all of us start to do that, it begins to become chaotic. We can't have agreement. We feel like it's us against them. And basically, the world begins to degrade pretty quickly. Likewise, if I decide I'm going to align with a team, especially a political team, the Democrats or Republicans or any particular group of people, and then dehumanize and demonize other groups, I am also violating some of the principles of self-preservation. Because what happens is I create enemies for my team that would not have existed otherwise, and create a conflict where none needs to be. And this can also begin to then create division, divisiveness, creating potential destruction of the humanity that we all might aspire to. Now, there's certainly a third way. The first way being the base level way, me against the world. The second way being the culture level way, us against them. And the third way being that it is me and you. We are a team. We are Team Human, so to speak. And I'm just realizing actually now that I'm wearing my Team Human t-shirt, so this is apropos. But the idea that where I go, you go. And by taking care of you, I'm taking care of me. And by paying attention to your needs and my needs at the same time, I'm taking care of us and you are taking care of us. And what if everyone worked that way, right? Instead of being extremely individualistic, base level human, or extremely team-based, culture level human, we were instead extremely both. We were both for ourselves and others simultaneously. We were both growing ourselves, but we were doing that and evolving ourselves so that we could better the world. This is the next level human way of looking at this. Now, when it comes to disinformation and misinformation and free speech, let's talk a little bit about the definitions here just for a minute, and then the different ways that maybe a base level human coming at this versus a culture level human coming at this versus a next level human coming at this would potentially look at these issues and interact with information in general. Disinformation, in my mind, is what base level humans would ply in. If it's me against the world and I'm looking for power and I'm looking to elevate myself over you, then I'm going to do whatever it takes to make myself look good, make you look bad, get myself money, and keep you away from power. So I'm going to look for material gain for myself, monetary gains for myself, and comfort and stability and safety for myself without any care for you. In fact, I will procure safety, stability, power for myself at the expense of you. So in a very real way, I care about only myself and I do not care about you. And I will certainly hurt you to help myself. This is sort of the base level way of looking at this. Now, when we talk about disinformation, disinformation is this idea that I know what I'm talking about is not true. Or I know that I have no proof for it, but I speak about it as truth. And I do it and use it in a way to further the goal of either tearing you down and elevating myself up or tearing another group down so that I can create an enemy out there. And base level humans oftentimes do this in their head. Part of the reason they do this is not because we're bad people, it's because their fear predominates, and their major motivational drive has to do with safety and security. And so when you are scared as an individual, if that's your default state, you will look out there and assume everyone is out to get you, whether they are or not. And yes, I have, and we should all have, compassion for individuals like this. But we also have to realize these individuals exist in the world, and they do ply in disinformation. Now, at a one-on-one level, you see this all the time, don't you? Friends gossiping about other friends, saying things that are untrue. We can see this on an individual level with shit talking and gossip. And oftentimes you see this in teenagers and kids and young adults. And then most of us either mature out of that or we begin to rein it in a little bit because we know it's not culturally acceptable. In order to get our aims, if we are a base level human, we need to be a little bit more Machiavellian, more manipulative, more quiet about it. But base level humans will be narcissistic, Machiavellian, and psychopathic in their orientations to the world. In case you are not familiar with psychology research, these are the three traits of the dark triad. Narcissism, which basically says, I am better than you and I deserve more than you. Machiavellianism, which means I will do things to manipulate you and tear you down so I can get gain. And psychopathy, meaning that I don't care about your feelings and nor can I be empathetic and compassionate towards you. I simply care about my gain. Base level humans tend to be very, very strong in the dark triad traits of narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy, and they will apply in disinformation. And so disinformation is the idea that I know something's not true, or I can't prove that it's true, and I will use it as a weapon. I will weaponize information that is false or unprovable as of yet in order to get my way or to tear someone else down. This is disinformation. Okay, and this can also be applied in the realm of one government to the other. So, for example, Russia applying disinformation against the United States, let's say, or the United States applying disinformation against Russia. Another word for this, by the way, when it's taken to the level of geopolitical situations would be propaganda. Right? So this idea of propaganda, things that we are going to use to turn other people away from certain ideas and get them on board with our ideas. And just so you know, whenever we're in uncertain, fearful times, which we certainly are right now coming off of COVID and some of those things, what we have seen in research is that people tend to, when they are stressed, go more base level. Propaganda tends to be more effective against individuals. And so disinformation is something that will be used by base level humans. Now, misinformation is the idea that I'm going to pass on information that I don't know is true, but I'm not doing it on purpose to hurt you or hurt other people. I'm simply passing it on. I'm simply a link in the chain. So in a sense, misinformation is not as bad in a sense, and this is usually applied in the realm of culture level humans. They will take disinformation or information they can't prove that looks bad for the other team, for example. I'm going to pass on information that's negative about Donald Trump or negative about Joe Biden or negative about the Democrats and positive about the Republicans because I align myself with a particular team. Now, it doesn't matter what team that you associate with. Hopefully, if you're an aspiring next level human and you've been listening to this podcast, you are slowly understanding that you shouldn't be on either team. You should be on team human, not team Republican or team Democrat. You should not be on extreme right or extreme left, but rather in the extreme middle, and that we need more people like this who are actually operating from first principles rather than base level self-survival and culture level team think. But culture level people oftentimes will pass on disinformation, not being the originators of this disinformation, but being the sort of gasoline on the fire of this information and spread it. And so disinformation might be purposely deceiving people. Misinformation is unknowingly passing this stuff on. But it's no less evil, is it, in a sense? It's no less destructive, is it, in a sense? And this, we know from history in the world, is extremely dangerous and can kill millions. All we need to do is call up World War II and the propaganda around that and how it kind of started with disinformation amongst a few base level humans that then went to misinformation among mostly good people who were psychologically hijacked by a few base level humans. And by the way, this can happen, and some would argue happens all of the time, and it's always a constant battle. And of course, then on top of that, we have to look at this idea, well, we can't get to this point where it's like we don't want disinformation because we know it's incredibly dangerous, and we know the internet has amplified its danger, and we want to mitigate against misinformation, of course, but we cannot go and then say, well, we don't want any information, because as soon as we start policing information in general, we also lose the thread of truth. And so we have this very weird thing that happens here where we have disinformation and lies on one hand, freedom of speech on the other hand, and the need to be able to express ourselves and to have different ideas, and then this gasoline on the fire in the middle that would be misinformation. And the whole point of me doing this particular podcast is to draw to all of our attention that we are the individuals amongst our family and our friends and all the culture level humans out there, which, by the way, just as an aside, hopefully you know that when we talk about the next level human construct in psychology, there's no such thing as a next level human, so to speak. It's just where you're operating most of the time. So all of us can be base level at times. Hopefully, as you listen to this podcast, you begin to catch yourself and are spending less time in base level mindsets. We all can be culture level at times and team based in our thought processes. Hopefully, though, as a listener of this podcast, you're slowly realizing that the next level human way of being is the most important and best way to be, to grow ourselves, evolve the world, and leave a positive imprint on everyone. So how do we, as aspiring next level humans who can sometimes go base level and sometimes go culture level, deal with this continuum of disinformation and misinformation and truth, and deal with freedom of speech around that? Let me interrupt the show just for a few minutes because I want to tell you about one of our sponsors, Evolve Telemed. One of the questions I get all of the time, one of the services that you are asking me for constantly is hormone replacement therapy. Women going through menopause, women going through perimenopause, women in postmenopause, women under stressful situations who are dealing with low sex hormone levels, estrogen and progesterone, are constantly asking me about progesterone therapy or estrogen and progesterone therapy. And men, same thing, constantly asking me about testosterone replacement therapy. Plenty of you, many of you, always asking, Jade, can you prescribe me hormones? I need testosterone if you're a man, or I need estrogen and progesterone or testosterone if you're a woman. And I always have to say that I am no longer seeing patients in this way because my educational duties are keeping me so busy. And this is where Evolve Telemed comes in. I have been looking for a company that does bioidentical hormone replacement therapy, and that is critically important. If you're going to be doing HRT or TRT, HRT being hormone replacement therapy for women, TRT being testosterone replacement therapy for men. If you are going to do these therapies, you want the bioidentical hormones. You want the hormones that your body makes naturally, that your body can recognize, that is no different from the hormones your body would make if you were making adequate levels. Bioidentical hormone replacement therapy does just this. And Evolve Telemed is a company that I am now using for my own testosterone replacement needs, and have been super impressed with the way that they have structured their business model. And so I am now bringing this service to you through my partnership with Evolve Telemed. Essentially, the way this works is you go online, You make an appointment with Evolve. Evolve gets a doctor with you on a Zoom call. They go through your whole case. They go through your blood labs. They then prescribe your hormones directly to you, and you can get those hormones wherever you are. You do not have to go to a clinic near you. All you need is to have an internet access point, and you can meet with an expert in bioidentical hormone replacement therapy and get those prescriptions. Now you can see why this is so powerful, can't you? Because this is something that so many of us need and can benefit from for our aging needs, our sexual health needs. These things have profound impact on mood, hair, skin, erections, libido, you name it. These things do everything for our metabolic health and vitality. So I am incredibly excited to bring Evolve Telemed to you. Now, the link that you go to is drjade.com/hormones. drjade.com/hormones. This will bring you to the Evolve Telemed portal. If you use the code Next Level, you will get a discount on checkout for your first patient visit. I'm very excited to be able to bring this to you, and I hope you will use Evolve Telemed. I know you're going to find it extremely powerful to move your hormone needs over to them. Check them out, Evolve Telemed. Use the link drjade.com/hormones. drjade.com/hormones for Evolve Telemed. And let's get back to the show. Now, this brings us to the concept of first principles. And I want to ask you a couple questions here. What do you think are the most important first principles that a human can have? Do you think, for example, honesty is more important than kindness, or do you think kindness is more important than honesty? Do you think strength is more important than generosity, or do you think generosity is more important than strength? Now, the reason I bring this up is because these are very important questions to ask. In my mind, when you think about first principles, you start to go, okay, what is the most important thing for me as a human to show up in the world as, so that the rest of the world is better? So for example, let's take honesty and kindness. Now, if I show up kind and I'm a people pleaser and I always just say nice things to you all of the time, even though you're an asshole or you're not doing very good, or, a very simple example, your breath stinks, let's say, and I want to be kind, which is funny because I just did a bad breath episode a couple episodes ago. So we'll go with this idea of bad breath. Now, if you have bad breath and I want to be kind, kindness says don't tell you, right? But if I don't tell you, then what happens? As my friend, I will potentially keep you from having deep relationships. Perhaps your girlfriend or boyfriend, or your significant other or romantic partner. Perhaps you won't find a romantic partner because you're constantly turning them off with your bad breath. And by me being kind, I'm perpetuating this dysfunction in you and keeping you from being your best self or having your best life. Instead, if I was honest, lovingly honest, I could say, listen, I love you, but your breath is horrible. And you really should do something about it because I'm afraid other people are going to smell that and then distance themselves from you. Now, take bad breath as a metaphor for a bad personality, being an asshole, right? So what do you think is more of a first principle now, kindness or honesty? Now, I struggled with this in my life. A lot of you know my story, where I was an overly people pleaser for a very long time, well into my 30s. It ended up with me having an affair and, doing some very unkind, and destructive things in my life and to people I loved. And this made me realize that honesty is always kinder than kindness. And so there's no doubt in my mind why many cultures and religions have always put honesty as one of the top first principles. Now, you can go through the same exercise with strength and generosity, but the whole point of this is I want to ask you, what do you think is a more important first principle? Freedom of speech or truth? Which is better? If everyone was truthful, would the world be better versus everyone saying whatever they wanted? Now, of course, I'm framing this as a black and white issue. That's what we do when we play around with psychology and philosophy and these questions. Now, of course, there's going to be some place in between, right? Where we want freedom of speech. And you might be someone that's like, I'm a freedom of speech absolutist. I don't care what you say. You should be able to say whatever you want. And this has been said in many different ways. Perhaps the most, memorable one is, I might hate what you say, but I'll die for your right to say it. Is that where you come down on freedom of speech? Or do you think that lies should be punishable? Now, I'm not here to answer this question for you. I'm just here to get you to think about this. What happens if we protect people and say everyone should be able to say whatever they want in a world where disinformation is incredibly dangerous and misinformation adds fuel to the fire on that disinformation and destructive nature? Should we allow people to incite riots or lie? And should there not be any penalty for that? For example, if you say that Jade is a murderer and a rapist or whatever it is about me that is untrue, and shouldn't I have the ability to then combat that in some way? And in some regards, our laws do wrestle with this, but they almost always come down on the side of freedom of speech, not necessarily truth. In other words, it would be incredibly difficult for me to sue you for lies that you tell about me, and the danger would have already been done with those lies. Now, you might ask me, Jade, where do you come down on this? Well, I'm pretty close to a freedom of speech absolutist. However, the internet has changed this for me to some degree, because now that I see how dangerous untruths can be, I start thinking that maybe, yes, freedom of speech to me is more important than truth, partly because I believe the more people talking and the more people in the town square having voices and speaking gets us further to truth. But I also realize now, with the potential of the town square being everywhere and everyone talking at once, the truth is easily drowned out. And secondly, there are bad actors that have bigger voices now than ever before. And so in a sense, it used to be like when we were on a town square, it might be that everyone would go up to the microphone, take their turns and talk. But now you can imagine we're in the town square and everyone has their own microphone and they're all talking all at the same time. But the most sensational and the people who are the most ridiculous or lie the most or create the most sensational sounding arguments have the louder megaphones. So now imagine in this town square, we're all there. Instead of each of us coming up and having an equal voice, now you've got whoever is the most sensationalized, right, gets the louder megaphone, and everyone else's megaphones are muffled. This is kind of what we're dealing with now. So should we continue to allow people who ply in disinformation and misinformation to have the loudest microphones? How do we balance this idea of getting everyone to have a voice and making sure that we protect that, while we also don't allow people who are the most sensational and the ones who already are bad actors on purpose to not have the loudest microphones, or perhaps to even have their microphones taken away from them? So this is the idea that we're talking about. And by the way, these are kind of big ideas, right? This is nothing that we're going to solve by talking on this podcast right now. The whole point is to get you thinking about it, right? And I will offer some things that I think are ways that we could begin to think about this, but I'm simply here to get us to all think about it, right? Now, one of the other things we have to talk about here is the ideas around how we create stories. If you're a base level human, you create a story of an me against the world. And part of the reason that you're creating that story is because you believe the world is bad and dangerous and will take your safety and stability away from you. In a sense, a base level human looks out in the world and sees a war. And so they will then see that there are battles everywhere, most of them aimed at themselves, whether those battles exist or not. And so therefore they will adopt a defensive and offensive posture towards everyone and everything. Oftentimes an offensive posture where they will actually go on the attack, make things up, do whatever they can to tear others down and build themselves back up. And this is where we get into the land of conspiracy theories and things like that. And by the way, I just highlighted on my Instagram feed an interesting study, psychological study, where they looked at during uncertain times and fearful times, which COVID was one. And I say was because hopefully we are coming out of COVID now. But what ends up happening at that time is that during those times, what this study was looking at is that people high in the dark triad traits of narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy tend to seek power. Part of the reason they tend to seek power during this time is because they're narcissists. So they think they are better than everyone else, but they're also Machiavellian and psychopathic, which means they think, hey, I am the one who should be leading. I am better than everyone else, and I will also have these tendencies to manipulate and lie and cheat others. And so what they were essentially saying is that people who are low in dark triad traits, the least narcissistic, the least Machiavellian, the least psychopathic, tend not to seek power during these times, these scary times, but that people high in dark triad traits do. And the other thing this study said was that it basically looked at and said, not only do these people tend to seek power, they tend to get it as well. Because for some reason, people who are narcissistic and more sure of themselves, they look to other fearful people as if they know what they are doing. And they oftentimes can stir up our own fears, make us more base level, which gets us in alignment with them. And then they achieve power. And so this is a dangerous time. Any time where there's economic unrest, psychological unrest, a pandemic, economic issues, those kinds of things, we are in danger of being base level ourselves and base level humans elevating themselves to leadership positions. And we are in danger of being duped into voting for these particular people. We are also more vulnerable to disinformation and passing misinformation on. In other words, during these times of angst and security and stability issues, we will tend to become more base level if we're base level, more culture level if we're culture level, and less next level human. And this is very important. This is where conspiracy theories and things like this come from. Now, one of the things, I talk a whole lot on conspiracy theories, and I oftentimes get a lot of flack for it. And I don't mind because, to me, I think it's a very, very important topic. And I've done a whole episode on conspiracy theories. And one of the studies that I really like to highlight when I'm talking about conspiracy theories is a study called On the Viability of Conspiratorial Beliefs. And basically what this study looks at, that's the title of the study, by the way, if people want to look it up, it is free to read on the internet, On the Viability of Conspiratorial Beliefs. And one of the things that this study looks at is it essentially says that there is a very strict math to conspiracy theories. In other words, what it looks at is it essentially says, if you have one person, let's say me and you decide we're going to kill somebody or do something evil, or we run a chemical company and we want to pollute the water or whatever. And it's just me and you, right? You and me, two people. And we decide to do this thing and we keep it a secret. Now, ultimately, there's a good chance we're going to be able to keep that a secret. But there's two of us. And we got a long life and lots of things come up. I might get with, a partner who, I meet somebody who changes my mind, who's super kind. I might go through a loss and, have a change of heart. You and I might, run into differences and part ways and try to get back at each other. It's likely that you and I might tell on each other at some point, right? Maybe we'll die with the secret. Maybe we'll stay best buds forever. But there's a chance, isn't there, that one of us will tell on the other. Now, if it's just one person, just me who's perpetrating this thing, I could keep that a secret forever. But once you put two people in to the mix, now all of a sudden the chances of that secret getting out are basically cut in half. Now magnified at times 3, or add a third person in, now a fourth person in, now a fifth person in. What ends up happening is this starts to degrade very quickly. The chances of this secret getting out start to compound very, very quickly. It's not doubling and tripling. It's like compounded interest. It becomes very, very difficult to begin to keep a secret when you start getting up into the 10s and 20s and 30s. And what this study basically looks at is that most conspiracies, once they get into sort of double numbers and triple numbers, hundreds of people, and especially when you get up into thousands of people who have to be involved in a conspiratorial event, what ends up happening is it degrades very quickly. That secret is going to get out very quickly. And we have evidence of this. Let's just look at the Watergate scandal. Let's look at the cigarette companies. We obviously know that conspiracies happen. And they're happening now. They've happened in the past. The more people involved, the faster this stuff gets out. And the math on this is very clear. And so it's very important to understand this. And so whenever we are applying and the only reason I'm going through this is because to help us all begin to spot disinformation and misinformation. As soon as we start saying that there are, the entire scientific community is, for example, conspiring with vaccines. Now, these are thousands and thousands of individuals at hundreds, if not thousands, of different entities and universities, all in very different countries, all with very different cultures, all with very different ideas, all checking each other. The chances of that happening are almost nil. In fact, nil, right? That just is not going to happen with that amount of numbers of people in a profession that the whole profession is designed to check each other, which is why these things are found out very quick in science. That's why studies are retracted very quickly. That's why these things are oftentimes called out and you can find them very quickly. And there's also a huge penalty for any scientist that does try to dupe the public or to, basically fudge the numbers or is too in the bed of industry. This stuff comes out more often than that. And ironically, since we're talking about vaccines, this was a very famous example of this. When the MMR vaccines were essentially found in studies to basically be linked to autism. A lot of people don't know this. Everyone in the medical field knows this, and almost everyone in the science field knows this, but a lot of people who are not scientists or medical professionals don't know this, that particular scientist basically fudged their numbers and was found out. That information was never duplicated. And since then, there have been thousands and thousands and thousands of studies done with very independent researchers to look at this issue, finding no issues with MMR and autism. Now, of course, there could be issues with vaccines that we don't know in other places, but this is an example of somebody who doctored the numbers due to this is disinformation due to nefarious intent and issues around personal finances. One individual who was found out, who still did damage that is still being reverberated today in many of the vaccine movements. Most people who are anti-vaccine probably don't even know where this even came from. Right? Now, I'm not taking a position either way. What I'm trying to essentially say here is that ultimately, if we want to, and by the way, when I say I'm not taking a position either way, I'm not saying, that I know for sure all vaccines are 1,000% safe. I am pro-vaccine. You've heard me say that before. But that does not mean that all vaccines are the same. That does not mean that certain people can't be harmed by vaccines. It basically just means that vaccines, historically speaking, in the literature have saved more lives, along with antibiotics and hygiene, probably than any other thing on the face of the earth. Now, that does not mean that the COVID vaccine is 1,000% safe, and I know that to be true, but it certainly looks like the data is showing that. And if it's not, and Moderna and Pfizer and all these companies are somehow halting data, which some of them, their data is being scrutinized constantly, it will be found out. And this is the point here. And now the whole point of going through this, though, is to help you understand that when you see disinformation or misinformation, that you can spot it. And this study on the viability of conspiratorial beliefs helps us with one rule that you can begin to look at for yourself. The more people involved, the less likely this thing is to be true. So then you can think about, well, how many people would have had to be involved to keep something like the moon landing, to fake the moon landing? How many people would have had to have been involved to pull off something like 911? How many people would have to be involved to pull off something like manufacturing the COVID vaccine or something like that? You start to see very quickly that these are going to have to be thousands of people. And right off the bat, it just doesn't hold common sense value in terms of this mathematical equation related to conspiratorial events and beliefs. Now, again, this does not mean these things can't happen. But the reason that I'm going through this is to say we should not, if we don't know for sure and we're sending and passing that information around, we are applying in misinformation. And if we're making things up, right? If we are literally making things up, like we're saying, 100,000 people have been killed from the vaccine, and we're making that up, and we're starting up a website, and we're tweeting it, and we're doing all that, that is applying in disinformation. And from my perspective, this is immoral at worst and incredibly irresponsible at best. If we want to be good humans, we would not be doing that. And here's the interesting thing about this also. We run into this boy who cried wolf effect. If we start finding conspiracies everywhere, making it up or passing on conspiracies all the time, then what happens? It's like the boy who cried wolf. That's, I'll go through the story in case people don't know. Basically, if a boy runs to your house every day and says, there's a fire, there's a wolf outside, and then you look and there's no wolf or there's no fire, pretty soon you're going to start ignoring that boy. He's going to lose. First couple times he comes and yells, you're going to go and look and get the water bucket or do something to get the wolves away from your chickens, right? But the more he does it and the more you see there is no wolf, the more you don't trust him. So if everyone is spouting off conspiracy beliefs all of the time, implying in disinformation and misinformation, then what happens is you no longer believe it when it really is the real deal, because you've lost the thread and you don't know how to tell fact from fiction. And this brings us to the next point about disinformation and misinformation. That is actually the entire point for the person who is the base level human who is starting the disinformation. In fact, when countries are applying in this misinformation, disinformation campaign against another country that they find an enemy, they will flood untrue things all over the place, creating so much noise in the town square that no one can make sense of anything and scaring the hell out of everyone in the process. And this has never been done before in the history of mankind. The internet has allowed this to happen. The internet has allowed there to be 1,000 people, 1 million people crying wolf all at the same time, confusing everybody so that someone can sneak the wolf in and steal or just do destruction right under your nose and you don't even know it. And so you lose the thread. And this is essentially what has happened, which is why I think it is becoming perhaps the most dangerous thing that we are now dealing with in our modern day society. And unfortunately, people are being caught by this disinformation, misinformation, conspiratorial campaigns, hook, line, and sinker. I have seen it in the natural medicine community, which was incredibly discouraging to me as an evidence-based individual who really wants to know the truth of things. I am not pro this or that. I am pro truth. I am pro evidence. I am very much on board with what the evidence tells us. And I'm okay saying I don't know when we don't know. I'm okay saying we need to hear all voices. What I'm not okay with, though, is letting liars, cheaters, base level humans and people who want to ply in disinformation and misinformation do so without penalty. Now, this is part of what we want to talk about now, because freedom of speech, to me also, I told you, I'm also close to a freedom of speech absolutist. Basically, I believe the more people talking and the more debating and the more views, despite how disgusting I think they are, if you're a racist and a bigot and whatever you are, I still want to hear what you have to say. And I still will fight for your right to say it, so long as you are not inciting violence and doing damage in that way, which, by the way, damage, right? And this is where some of this comes from. Damage is hard to measure, because it might not be your intent with your misinformation to hurt people, but you may hurt people in the process regardless. And rest assured, these untruths hurt people. There are people for who the not taking a vaccine may have killed them because they heard that it might be bad or give them 3 eyes or whatever it is. This can do real damage. Now, whatever your political beliefs are, I hope I'm not triggering you. This should not be political at all. If we are all aspiring next level humans, then I am willing to be wrong and willing to be right, and you should be willing to be wrong and willing to be right, and we both should be willing to say we don't know, because that's going to be the truth most of the time. So why are you feeling triggered when you're listening to this? If I have a different point of view, you should be interested in that because you can learn from it. I am certainly interested in yours. And this, to me, is how we should be thinking about interacting with each other. We should be upholding the ability for people to speak, but I also think that we should be finding some way to penalize, while not canceling people and not letting them speak, people who have shown a consistent disregard for the truth. What do you think? Do you think people should be held accountable? And this is a real question. I want to stop right here and just ask, do you think that people should be held accountable for disinformation and misinformation? And if so, how should they be held accountable? Now, I certainly don't think they should be held accountable by their platform being taken away from them without a warning. Certainly, we've had situations. I will tell you this right now, and I have no problem saying it. And hopefully, if some of you need to stop following me and not listen to my podcast, that's just fine. I am not a fan of Donald Trump. I never have been. I'm also not a Democrat, and I'm not a fan of Joe Biden. But Donald Trump is someone who I have never been a fan of since the 90s. I do not like the guy. I think he is, I'll just come out and say it, this is my opinion, I think he is not a good human being. I don't think he's a good human. And I think we can demonstrate that by calling people fat and disgusting on Twitter, by lying constantly with, by many, many different things that he's done going back into the 90s since I've been following Donald Trump living in Manhattan. Now, by the way, I could be wrong about him. I don't know Donald Trump. Okay. Now, you should be, when you listen to that, whether you like Donald Trump or not, you should be, okay, I'm going to hear Jade. I want to hear what his perspective is. And by the way, I want to hear your perspective why you might like him. Now, as much as I don't like him, I don't like the fact that he was taken off of Twitter. And here's why, by the way. Okay, I'll tell you why I don't like that. Because the rules in Twitter say that anyone who lies, who plies in misinformation, who is nasty to other people should be taken off right away. Have you ever gone and looked on Twitter and actually seen what their sort of terms and agreements are? If you go on and you are harassing people on Twitter, you should you are immediately deplatformed. If you or I started to harass somebody and they complained about us, our Twitter feeds would get shut down. But for some reason, when Donald Trump was doing this very early on, he wasn't shut off. Why? Because he had a big platform. So that says one thing about what I don't like about the people who are running Twitter, right? The fact that, look, they're a private company. They can do whatever they want. It's not censorship. It's not freedom of speech. If you don't go with their bylaws and you don't do what they say and you are disrupting the community and they are a private company or a public company or a privately owned company, they can do whatever they want. Right? So they can get rid of us. But the fact that they did it later on with Trump, and not in the beginning with Trump. I think Trump, if he's going to be booted off Twitter, should have been booted off Twitter in the beginning. And I think everyone else should be applied that same way. Now, I bet all of you, whether you're Democrat, Republican, Trump fan, not a Trump fan, you probably agree with that. And you might be shocked to be like, well, here's a guy who doesn't like Trump, who still wants to hear what Trump has to say. And to me, I don't think it's fair the way Twitter did that. Now, at the same time, I don't think that, taking away the organization of Twitter and replacing it with one man is a good idea either. Do we really think that Elon Musk is going to do a better job upholding truth? He might do a better job with freedom of speech, but will he do a good job with misinformation and disinformation? Now, again, all of this is just to get us to think, right? I am an American first and foremost. I will vote for a Democrat or a Republican based on the quality of human they are, the judgment they have, and the political evidence base they have to do good for my country and the world. I don't care. Democrat, Republican, someone else. I've come to dislike both parties. Now, you might feel different. I would love if we could all get in a room, right? And we could talk about it. You could say, Jade, I think you should be a Republican because of this, or I think you should be a Democrat because of this, or I think you should reconsider Donald Trump because of this, or I think you should reconsider Biden because of this, right? This is the conversation that we should be having. But that assumes that we're coming at it from a place of charity and a next level human standpoint. If we have base level humans in the room, they will just hate me because I don't have a favorable view of Donald Trump if they like Donald Trump. Or they'll just hate me because I don't have a favorable view of Joe Biden because they like Joe Biden. Right? That's what a culture level human does. What we need to do is we need to start with the law of charity in my mind. And then we need to essentially step back and say, how do we then get everyone talking and incentivize people telling the truth as next level humans and learning from each other and decentivizing lies, disinformation, and spreading of misinformation. Now, I've shared a lot today. I got a little vulnerable with you. I shared some personal feelings with you. I hope that you like that. I did that on purpose. I knew I was going to do that in this episode, partly because it speaks to freedom of speech. Isn't it interesting that people want freedom of speech, but then when they get all torn out of shape when they hear a viewpoint that doesn't agree with them? Some of you right now are really liking me because I have a dislike for Donald Trump, and some of you are not liking me because I have a dislike for Donald Trump. The whole reason I brought it up is to challenge you to basically say, where are you operating from? Your base level or culture level selves, because now all of a sudden you're more or less likely to listen to me because you heard my point of view? Then in my mind, if you're doing that, you are acting more base level or culture level. You are not operating from your next level human self. Now, I know we all have that potential. And of course, you're not alone. I might go base level and culture level too, but if we're all operating from that standpoint, wouldn't the world be a better place? And so we have this issue of freedom of speech and law of charity and letting everyone talk, but also de-incentivizing, in my point of view, lies, disinformation, and misinformation. How do we do that? That's what this podcast was about. Now, as I end this podcast, which, by the way, was not meant to provide solutions, it's just getting you to think in a very different way, so that you and me and our families and the greater community and our nation and the world, because this literally is how it starts, people having real conversations and being comfortable with just saying, okay, you disagree with me. You see it this way. I see it this way. I'm not mad at you because you're a Trump fan. You might know something I don't. I'm not mad at you because you're a Biden fan. You might know something that I don't, or you might have a piece of information for me to consider, and I am happy to upgrade my belief system. What I'm not happy with is that if you're going to throw disinformation, lies, and bullshit my way, or if you're going to apply in conspiratorial things, then we can't actually have a real conversation, and it's not necessary. And if we're applying in those conspiratorial things, then guess what? When there are real issues that come up that need to be solved, real issues going on, then guess what? They get lost because of the crying wolf constantly. This is really important. So let's go through some things that might work, that I've talked to my friends about, my girlfriend about, been having this conversation and actually read about, right? What would happen if the social media algorithms scoured, instead of looking at things that were sensational and just being like the things we click on, because we know that sensational, emotional driven clickbait gets our attention. But what if instead they looked for words that were dehumanizing, divisive, destructive, base level language and culture level team think, and decentivize those things? In other words, you can say it. No one's stopping you from saying it, but the algorithms are essentially saying this is divisive, demonizing, dehumanizing language towards another group. Therefore, it's going to get less play. Certainly, people who are close to you and want to hear that are free to go to your profile, but we're going to show that stuff to less people, right? How about this idea that came from my girlfriend? How about the idea that when people come on new platforms, rather than just letting them post constantly, they have a ramp-on period where they're learning to be less divisive, less dehumanizing, and less demonizing, meaning that they can only post once per day or once a week, and they're getting feedback that basically says, hey, your post will reach more people if you remove some of this inflammatory language. Or, hey, we'll post this for you, but it might not get much play because there's no proof for this. We don't have proof that, this is, a factual thing. It looks like this is disinformation or misinformation. Would you like to adjust your post? Maybe that would work. Maybe by including references that are, sort of vetted references, your post would be amplified. Maybe the algorithms could work in a way that forced us subtly and slowly to understand how to act through the law of charity, be less divisive, less dehumanizing, and more accurate in what we are saying. What if you were penalized, just like if you, nowadays with Amazon, if you write too many 5-star reviews, they start to suspect you're not a real reviewer. And if you write too many 1-star reviews, you're not a real reviewer. What if there was a situation where the way you were online followed you around, and if you were constantly a troll and constantly disrupting conversations and not contributing, that you were dinged for that? No one's going to take away and deplatform you, but the fact of the matter is, if you're not being a productive member of society and you've got a big bullhorn and you're trying to drown other people out and you're not giving other people the benefit of the doubt and you're calling names and you're acting like an ass, that you are decentivized. Your posts are not shown as much. What would things be like then, right? There are ways that we could force people to basically be better humans without taking away their freedom of speech, but also teaching them to be more truthful and honest, making learning more important than winning. What if we had something that was like a Yelp review for humans, where you were no longer anonymous online? What if that was a thing? You could not be anonymous online if you wanted to operate in the public space. We need to know who you really are. That would change things a little bit, because we all know if I can be anonymous, right, and there's no repercussions and you can't see me face to face, you and I might have incredibly different belief systems and may not even like each other. But if we get face to face with each other and we can talk, we're going to find common ground as humans. Almost always. Doesn't matter. That is always the case. And therefore, not letting people hide behind their computer screens might be something that we should consider. What if there were rewards for people who, not just decentivizing, but what if there were rewards for people who were more active in finding and policing bad behavior online, and that you could essentially be incentivized for your good behavior online, for not being an ass, for not being disruptive, for actually applying in good quality information and being part of a charitable debate online? All of these things could perhaps work. What if you were prioritized based on your expertise, right? Like, for example, if we're having a discussion about metabolism and natural medicine, then perhaps I should be magnified in terms of my voice in that conversation if I am showing over and over again that I am giving good quality, usable information to the community. And perhaps I should be de-incentivized from that platform of expertise as soon as I begin to show that I'm not providing good quality, evidence-based information to individuals. What if we did that? There are many other different ways to do that. And by the way, I don't know if these ideas are good ideas, bad ideas, neutral ideas. I am presenting them and presenting this conversation for all of us to begin thinking very deeply about this as we engage in the internet moving forward, because this is only going to get worse from country to country, from person to person. And we're starting to see this be a very big deal. How do we, as aspiring next level humans, learn from each other, tolerate each other, be better for each other, help our leaders be better, and help the internet space be more accurate so that we can keep freedom of speech for everybody and do it in a way that honors truth and integrity as top first principles? That's all I got for you today on today's podcast. Definitely hit me back on this one. If you're mad, if you're happy, if it got you thinking. My hope is that we can, in this podcast will be different than others in that we get to have these very deep conversations, and I can just be very real with you, my audience. Whether you love me or hate me, hopefully you'll show up and engage with me. So shoot me a DM, send me an email to support@jadeteta.com. Let me know what you think of this particular episode, and I would love to hear your ideas about how this might work, this way of keeping freedom of speech while also prioritizing truth as a next level human and next level culture. All right, everybody, I'll see you next time.